Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today. Listen, if you're a focused learner who loves a really good historical mystery, you are in for an absolute treat. Today, we're diving into a story that combines death-defying bravery with a geographical puzzle that, at first glance, seems to make zero sense. It's the story of the submariner of the Dardanelles and the legacy of Norman Holbrook. Keep that name in your back pocket because his legacy ends up manifesting in a very, very unexpected place. Picture this. You're driving through a rural agricultural town in New South Wales, Australia. You are literally hundreds of miles away from the nearest ocean. If you were visiting, you'd probably expect to see tractors, wheat silos, maybe some sheep, right? But instead, right in the middle of this landlocked farming community, there's a massive submarine park. I'm talking a dedicated submarine museum, an expansive scale model of a sub, and a towering bronze statue of a naval commander. Why on earth is this here? Well, to solve that puzzle, we have to travel across the globe and jump back in time.
Let's look at part 1, the impossible mission.
Okay, let's dive into this. We have to rewind the clock to the cold, treacherous morning of December 13th, 1914. The First World War has recently begun, and we're standing on the edge of the Dardanelles, one of the most heavily fortified, strategically critical maritime passages on Earth. And creeping into these churning waters is an absolute undeniable mismatch. On one hand, you have the HMS B11. This was a British submarine built nearly a decade prior in 1905. In the incredibly fast-moving landscape of early 20th century naval warfare, this 9-year-old boat was practically an antique. I mean, these early B-class subs were notoriously cramped, temperamental, and honestly dangerous to operate even in peacetime. They used primitive gasoline engines that pumped out toxic fumes and required constant, grueling maintenance. Against this fragile vessel, you have the Dardanelles. The Ottoman Empire had turned this narrow strait separating the Aegean Sea from the Sea of Marmara into a lethal choke point. The natural topography fed ferocious, unpredictable surface currents straight from the Black Sea. Navigating this submerged, an absolute nightmare. Yet, despite these profound limitations, a daring 26-year-old Royal Navy officer, Lieutenant Norman Douglas Holbrook, proposed an audacious mission to take his fragile B-11 right into the teeth of it. And just look at how massively stacked the odds were against him. The Ottomans had fortified everything. First, the shore batteries. The steep cliffs were heavily lined with artillery. Second, the naval mines. The Ottomans had anchored dense, overlapping fields of these beneath the surface. We're talking 5 entire rows of iron spheres packed with volatile explosives, moored by heavy chains just waiting to tear open a hull. And third, the naval guard, floating warships actively patrolling the waters. Sending a surface fleet into these explosives was widely recognized as tactical suicide. And attempting a submerged run in a primitive, outdated sub, the Admiralty considered it equally impossible. Which brings us to the next phase, beneath the minefields. To penetrate these defenses, Holbrook relied on a strategy with a terrifyingly narrow margin of error. It's like something straight out of a thriller. Step 1, dive the B-11 deep enough to slide directly underneath the moored minefields. Step 2, navigate entirely blind. Standard instruments were basically useless, so we had to rely on sheer maritime instinct against that powerful oncoming current. Step 3, slip safely past all 5 rows of hidden destruction. The crazy part here is the razor-thin margin. If the boat drifted even a few feet too shallow, it strikes a mine. If the vicious current shoves them off course, they get smashed into the mooring cables or driven ashore. But miraculously, moving meticulously through the lightless steps, Holbrook guides his crew beneath the first row, then the second, third, fourth, and finally the fifth, safely bypassing the explosive gauntlet. Once they were finally on the far side of that minefield, near Chanakale, Holbrook carefully brings the submarine up to periscope depth. And there it is, target sighted, the Masudia. This was a massive Ottoman ironclad battleship. Ironically enough, it was anchored there specifically to act as a floating guard for the very minefields Holbrook had just successfully bypassed. The strike was incredibly swift. Holbrook takes careful aim and fires a single torpedo. It tears through the water and strikes the heavily armored warship directly. This single mortal blow caused the great capital ship to just roll over, completely capsizing in a massive, spectacular cloud of smoke and spray. It was a stunning victory. A totally obsolete submarine had just taken down a massive ironclad. But the reality quickly set in. They were now completely trapped behind enemy lines. Getting the hit was only half the battle. Now came the escape from the Dardanelles. The detonation instantly alerted the Ottoman coastal defenses, completely turning the surrounding waters into a frantic, deadly hunting ground. The crew was suddenly facing a terrifying two-front onslaught. Externally, you've got enemy shore guns lashing the surface of the water the second a periscope appears. Swift torpedo boats and destroyers are scrambling to hunt them down. Holbrook was forced to systematically work his crippled vessel all the way back down the strait toward the Mediterranean. But internally, things were arguably much worse. The submarine's primitive systems were failing. Oxygen was rapidly depleting. The atmosphere inside that cramped hull grew incredibly toxic and foul from the gasoline engines. And to top it all off, the submarine's compass and navigational instruments began to malfunction under the extreme strain. Every single course correction took immense concentration. One single miscalculation meant steering a blind vessel directly into a mine or popping up into heavy artillery fire. Their survival really comes down to one staggering number: 9. Through sheer nerve and exceptional seamanship, Holbrook held his crew together and systematically worked the crippled boat back through the deadly gauntlet. By the time the HMS B11 finally surfaced in secure Allied waters, the crew had been submerged for an astonishing 9 consecutive hours. 9 hours of cold, dark, and suffocating tension. Yet remarkably, every single man on board was alive. And that unprecedented act of survival created an echo across oceans. The news of this exploit absolutely electrified the British public and the Admiralty. I mean, it completely rewrote contemporary naval doctrine, proving that an outdated submarine commanded with enough daring and precision could dismantle an empire's finest capital ships. The honors came swiftly. Lieutenant Holbrook was awarded the Victoria Cross, the British military's absolute highest honor. This is a huge deal because he was the very first submariner in history to receive it, and the first naval recipient officially gazetted during the First World War. Following this historic action, Holbrook would eventually rise to the rank of commander and even serve his nation again in World War II. So, how does all this connect back to our geographical mystery from the start of the explainer? Let's check the timeline. In 1914, we have the historic attack. Then we move to 1915. Halfway across the world in New South Wales, Australia, there's a small agricultural town originally named Germantown, named after early German settlers. But by 1915, as World War I escalated, a really fierce wave of anti-German sentiment swept across the British Empire. The townspeople were deeply uncomfortable with their historic name and wanted an inspiring new identity. Captivated by the sensational headlines of the young submarine commander, they actually voted on August 24, 1915, to officially erase Germantown and rename their entire community Holbrook. The timeline continues to his passing in 1976 at age 87, up to today where the town stands as a living monument. Think about that for a second. This act made him likely the only Victoria Cross recipient in history to have an entire town established as a living monument to his valor. But what I truly love about this story is that Holbrook didn't just ignore this distant namesake. He was deeply appreciative. He literally traveled across the globe to visit the town on 3 separate occasions throughout his life, forging a profound, permanent bond with that Australian community. And that bond was cemented forever after he passed away with the ultimate gift. Holbrook's widow donated his original priceless Victoria Cross medal directly to the town's care. Today, despite being hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean, the town of Holbrook is intensely proud of its bizarre naval heritage. That expansive submarine park, the scale model of the HMS B11, and that original medal sitting in rural Australia ensured that the legacy of a single hour of extraordinary courage in a narrow Turkish strait will never, ever be forgotten. Which leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question. How might a single hour of your own courage echo across generations and oceans? It's fascinating to think about how our actions, however constrained or impossible they might seem in the moment, can ripple out to shape the identity of people we've never even met, halfway across the world. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope you found it as captivating as I did, and hey, keep that curiosity alive.